That night no one screamed, not because there was no fear, not because nothing hurt, but because everyone in that house already knew one thing. In that house, screaming had a price. Not money, not fame, not even reputation. Something quieter, something that followed you long after the doors closed. Diddy was the host. Beyoncé was in the room. Jay-Z stood closest to the door. And before anyone ever called it a party, before the rumors, before the interviews and the carefully edited memories, it was already something else. A threshold. There are nights like that. Nights that don't ask who you are, how famous you are, or how many people scream your name when you step on stage. Nights that don't care about awards, numbers, or legacy. They don't announce themselves as important. They don't glow. They wait. And once you step inside them, you don't leave the same person. Years later, the industry would try to give that night a name. They always do. They can't help themselves. They called it the golden silence. A phrase that sounded poetic, safe, marketable. They said it was about discipline. They said it was about professionalism. They said it was the moment when artists learned how to survive at the highest level. What they never said was how many futures ended before sunrise. What they never said was how many voices were traded for permanence. What they never said was how carefully the silence was enforced. Because silence wasn't absence. It was agreement. The invitation arrived without warning. No email, no text message, no phone call, just an envelope. Heavy paper, black, unbranded. It appeared where it shouldn't have. On a kitchen counter that had been empty an hour earlier. On a hotel desk cleaned twice that day. On a studio couch no one else had entered. Inside, there was no letterhead, no logo, no address, just a single card, cream-colored. Gold lettering pressed so deep into the paper, it felt engraved rather than printed. A date, a time, and 3 rules. No phones, no guests, no records. At the bottom, a single sentence, smaller than the rest. If you're here, you already agreed. No one remembered agreeing, but everyone understood. Some people laughed when they read it. A short, nervous laugh they didn't fully trust. Others felt a tightness in their chest they couldn't explain. A few tried to ignore it. Those invitations came again. The location wasn't written, but everyone knew where to go. Diddy's house. Not the one people saw on magazine covers. Not the one featured in interviews or social media. Another one. A house that didn't appear in posts. A house that wasn't tagged. A house that existed more in whispers than in photographs. Cars arrived without music playing. Engines turned off quietly. No one wanted to be the loudest arrival. Security took phones without argument. No signatures. No lockers. Just hands outstretched. Some hesitated, but no one refused. Inside, the air felt different. Not heavy, not threatening. Alert, as if the house itself was listening. The deeper guests walked inside, the less they spoke. Conversations thinned, then disappeared entirely. By the time they reached the main room, silence had become instinctive. Speaking felt wrong, like interrupting something already in progress. Beyoncé entered without announcement. No entourage. No performance energy. Just presence. Her face was calm, perfectly composed, but her body told another story. Her shoulders were tight. Her hands were clasped just a little too firmly. She scanned the room quickly, professionally, not searching for friends, searching for exits. Jay-Z arrived moments later. He positioned himself near the door without thinking about it. Some habits don't come from paranoia. They come from experience. He didn't greet anyone, didn't nod. He watched. He counted. Young singers lined the walls. Some were barely known. Some had gone viral once and were still chasing the echo. They wore confidence like borrowed jackets, too stiff, too obvious. They smiled when eye contact happened. They stopped smiling when it didn't. The experienced ones stood closer to the center. They didn't talk. They didn't fidget. They knew better. Diddy stood among them, not elevated, not centered by force, centered by gravity. He didn't smile. He didn't frown. He didn't need to. The room adjusted itself around him. No music played, but the room wasn't empty of sound. There was a hum, low, constant, almost like electricity behind the walls. No clocks were visible. No windows open. Time felt sealed off, left outside with the phones. This wasn't a party. Parties have release. This had containment. The lights dimmed slowly, deliberately. Not suddenly enough to cause panic. Just enough to remove comfort. Then the music, what little there was, stopped completely. No one asked for silence. Everyone obeyed it anyway. A circle formed without instruction. No one could later explain how it happened. Feet shifted. Bodies adjusted. Space rearranged itself. Beyoncé lowered her head. Not in submission. In focus. Jay-Z closed his eyes. Not in prayer. In preparation. A voice filled the room. Not loud. not aggressive. Certain. No one could later say where it came from. "This is not a party," the voice said. "This is a crossing." No one reacted. No one needed to. They already knew. The voice continued. "You were invited because something in you wants to stay, and something else in you is willing to disappear." The floor grew cold, not symbolically, physically, stone cold, like standing on ground that had never been warmed by daylight. The walls vibrated faintly, a rhythm, steady, almost like breathing. No one ran. Running would have meant admitting you didn't belong, and everyone in that room wanted to belong. That was the real beginning, the moment when silence stopped being a lack of sound and became a contract. No one asked what kind of crossing it was. That was the first proof that it was already working. The circle held its shape without effort. No one leaned. No one shifted their weight too much. Stillness became a requirement before it became a rule. The voice returned, calm and patient, as if it had all the time in the world. "Every system survives on 3 things," it said. "Loyalty, silence, forgetting." The words didn't echo. They settled. Somewhere behind Beyoncé's ribs, her heart skipped once. She kept her head down. Jay-Z opened his eyes but didn't move. Diddy's expression didn't change. The voice continued. "Tonight is not about talent. Talent is common." A few people along the walls flinched. They had built their entire sense of worth on that word. "Tonight is about control," the voice said, "and whether you understand what must be controlled." A pause, long enough to let discomfort bloom. "Rule 1, the voice said. You do not surrender your voice." A subtle release moved through the room. Some shoulders loosened. "Hope." The voice waited for it. "Then, you surrender your will." The release vanished. This was the part no one had expected to hear out loud. The floor vibrated again, slightly stronger now. The hum in the walls deepened. Somewhere near the back of the room, someone swallowed too loudly. No one looked. The voice spoke again. "Rule 2, nothing you see here exists outside this room. Not in interviews. Not in art, not in confession." A few of the younger singers exchanged quick glances. This was not mentorship. This was erasure. "Rule 3, the voice said. There is no help." That sentence landed hardest, because everyone in the room understood what it meant. If you fell, you fell alone. If you broke quietly. If you disappeared clean. The wall shifted. Slowly, silently. A corridor revealed itself where there had only been marble moments earlier. Long, narrow, lined with mirrors from floor to ceiling. The mirrors were old, not antique in style, but in feeling. Like they had watched too many people stand in front of them and lie. The voice softened. "You will walk," it said. "You will look. You will not touch." The first person was chosen without explanation. A young singer, early 20s, beautiful voice, no armor. She stepped forward because she didn't know she was allowed to refuse. The mirrors activated the moment she entered the corridor. They didn't show her reflection. They showed her future. One mirror showed her on stage, singing to thousands, but her eyes were empty. Another showed her forgotten, scrolling through comments about someone younger, newer. Another showed her walking away from music entirely, alive but invisible. Her breath hitched. She reached out instinctively. "Do not touch," the voice warned. She pulled her hand back as if burned. When she reached the end of the corridor, she was shaking. She tried to speak. No sound came out. She collapsed where she stood. No one moved. Not Beyoncé. Not Jay-Z. They couldn't afford to. The next person walked. Then another. Some cried quietly. Some laughed nervously. Some stared too long and had to be guided back. Each time, the mirrors showed variations of the same truth. You can have success. You can have peace. You can have control, but never all 3. Beyoncé stepped forward when it was her turn. The room felt tighter instantly. The mirrors reacted differently to her. They showed lives that were almost hers. In one, she sang perfectly, but to small rooms. Respected, not worshipped. In another, she chose family first. Privacy. Joy. She was happy, and completely irrelevant. In another, she was extraordinary once, then replaced. Her legacy reduced to nostalgia. The mirrors didn't threaten her. They educated her. Her hands trembled. She didn't reach out. She didn't cry. She nodded once and stepped back into the circle. Jay-Z was next. He stepped forward slowly, deliberately. The mirrors stayed dark. No images, no futures, just absence. An outline where a man should be. That scared him more than any failure ever had, because emptiness meant he had already given everything that could be taken. When he stepped back, his jaw was tight. Diddy did not step forward. No one asked him to. The voice didn't acknowledge it. Some people don't need mirrors. The question came next. It filled the room without raising volume. What have you sacrificed the most in this life? Answers came in whispers. My family. My health. My truth. My childhood. Each answer tightened the air. With every silence, the room seemed to contract. When it was Beyoncé's turn, she said nothing. Silence. The room shrank. When it was Jay-Z's turn, he looked away. Silence. The room shrank again. Diddy nodded once. That was enough. A young man near the wall collapsed. His body hit the floor hard. The sound echoed. No one helped him, because Rule 3 was already in effect. There was no help here, only choice. Midnight arrived without clocks. The hum stopped. The corridor vanished. A door appeared. It hadn't existed before. Black, tall, waiting. The voice returned, final now. Not everyone gets to continue. Names were spoken. Some clearly, some gently, some not at all. Those who were called stepped forward. Some cried. Some smiled. Some looked relieved. They entered the door. It closed behind them. They were never seen again. Those who weren't called were escorted out at dawn. No explanations. No goodbyes. Just silence. And silence, once learned, is very hard to unlearn. No one ever described what was behind the door. Not because they were forbidden to speak. Because there were no words that fit. Those who walked through it didn't scream. Didn't struggle. Didn't look back. The door closed softly behind them. That detail mattered. It wasn't violence. It was selection. When dawn arrived, the house looked ordinary again. Too ordinary. Sunlight touched the marble floors like nothing had happened. Birds could be heard outside. Somewhere in the distance, traffic moved. Those who were escorted out didn't speak. They didn't ask questions. Didn't exchange numbers. They walked to their cars like people leaving a funeral that no one was allowed to name. Beyoncé left without sunglasses. Her eyes didn't look tired. They looked guarded. Jay-Z stayed a moment longer than necessary. He stood near the door, watching the empty space where it had been, as if memorizing it. Diddy was the last to leave. He paused in the doorway. For a moment, he looked older than he ever did in public. Then the look passed, and the house closed itself behind him. The first changes appeared within weeks, quietly. A singer who had barely been known suddenly had a major feature, then another, then an award nomination that made no sense on paper. An album debuted at #1 with no visible buildup. Industry insiders called it perfect timing. Others used words like inevitable. No one mentioned the house. At the same time, disappearances began. A woman who had collapsed during the ritual stopped answering calls. Her social media went dark. Her manager claimed she was taking time for herself. Months later, her name was removed from a collaboration she had already recorded. No explanation. A young man who had hesitated too long in front of the mirrors posted a cryptic message. I wish I had walked away sooner. The post vanished within minutes. His account followed. Then his presence. People who knew him stopped saying his name out loud. Silence spreads fastest when everyone benefits from it. Beyoncé released music later that year. It was flawless. Controlled. Powerful. But something had changed. Listeners couldn't explain it, but they felt it. The songs were colder, sharper, like they had been measured rather than felt. In interviews, she smiled the same way she always had. But when asked about inspiration, she spoke about discipline, about boundaries, about knowing when not to give too much of yourself away. Jay-Z gave interviews too. He talked about silence, about how real power didn't announce itself, about how survival required understanding when not to speak. People called it wisdom. They didn't hear the warning underneath. Diddy threw more parties. Louder ones, brighter ones. Lights stayed on longer than necessary. Music played even when no one was dancing, as if sound itself had become a shield. Not everyone stayed silent. Someone always believes they're the exception. A producer who had been present that night tried to talk. Not publicly, privately. He mentioned mirrors, mentioned the door. He framed it as metaphor, as trauma. Within weeks, his reputation unraveled. Old allegations surfaced. Contracts disappeared. Friends distanced themselves. He wasn't threatened. He was erased. Another tried to turn it into art. Lyrics that hinted. Visuals that suggested too much. The album never released. The label said it was creative differences. The masters were locked away. Silence isn't enforced with violence. It's enforced with incentives. The ones who succeeded fastest were the quietest. They didn't ask questions. Didn't revisit the night. They followed the unspoken rules perfectly. Loyalty. Silence. Forgetting. And forgetting wasn't passive. It was practiced. They learned not to think about mirrors. Not to sit in quiet rooms. Some couldn't sleep without music playing. Others avoided reflective surfaces altogether. A famous singer once admitted, off record, that she covered mirrors backstage before every show. She laughed when she said it, but her hands shook. Years passed. The industry moved on. New faces, new sounds, but the pattern remained. Sudden rises, clean disappearances, no scandals, just silence. The invitations never stopped. Different houses, different hosts, same rules. They arrived when people were most vulnerable, right after a rejection, right before giving up, when belief was fragile enough to be reshaped. And always the same sentence at the bottom. If you're here, you already agreed. Some ignored it. They lived normal lives. Some accepted. They continued. And some still wake up at night hearing a low hum in the walls. Breathing. Waiting. People always assumed the ritual happened in the house. In the circle. In the mirrors. Behind the door. That was the mistake. Those things were only preparation. The real ritual began afterward. It began the first time someone remembered the night and chose not to speak. That choice mattered more than anything that happened in the room. Because silence, once chosen willingly, becomes loyalty. And loyalty, once rewarded, becomes habit. No one ever gathered the survivors together again. There were no reunions, no secret meetings, no whispered confirmations. They didn't need them. They recognized each other instinctively. In studios, at award shows, backstage. A look held a second too long. A question that wasn't asked. A silence that lasted just enough. That was how they knew. The ones who had been through it all developed the same tells. They avoided mirrors when they could. They filled empty spaces with noise. They hated quiet dressing rooms. Silence wasn't peaceful to them. Silence listened. Some of them tried therapy. They talked around the night, described pressure, described fear, but never the mirrors, never the door. Language failed there. Because how do you explain a choice you can't undo? The industry helped, not actively, passively, by rewarding the right behaviors. Silence led to opportunity. Compliance led to protection. Forgetting led to longevity. Those who stayed quiet rose faster. They were called professional, reliable, easy to work with. Those who asked questions stalled. Those who hinted slowed down. Those who tried to tell the truth vanished quietly, buried under contracts, clauses, and character assassinations so subtle they looked like coincidence. The system didn't punish disobedience. It starved it. Beyoncé never spoke of that night. Not in interviews, not in lyrics, but traces leaked through anyway. In the way she spoke about control, in the way she framed power as something dangerous if mishandled, in the way she emphasized discipline over freedom. She had learned something the hard way. That the industry doesn't take voices, it trains them. Jay-Z understood it differently. He spoke about silence openly, but abstractly. He framed it as wisdom, as strategy. People applauded. They didn't realize he was explaining survival. Diddy stayed visible. That surprised some people. They expected withdrawal, distance, but he remained. Hosting, networking, smiling, as if visibility itself was proof of immunity. Lights stayed on in his houses long after parties ended. Music played in empty rooms, as if silence, once invited, had become something that needed to be drowned out. Years later, a journalist tried to trace the pattern. Not the night, the aftermath, sudden success stories, unexplained disappearances, careers that made no sense on paper. She created a board. Photos, dates, lines connected things that weren't supposed to be connected. Every path led to the same dead end. Silence. Her editor told her to drop it. Not angrily, not threateningly, casually. Some stories don't want to be told, he said. She listened. Most people do. Because resisting the system doesn't look heroic in real life. It looks lonely and expensive. The invitations still arrive. They always will. Different names now. Different genres. Same design. Same rules. They come when people are tired. When they're desperate. When they're close to quitting. They arrive when belief is weakest and hunger is strongest. And always, always the same sentence waits at the bottom. If you're here, you already agreed. That sentence matters, because it shifts responsibility. It tells you this was your choice. No one forced you. No one dragged you. You walked in. And once you believe that, once you accept that narrative, the silence becomes yours to maintain. That's the genius of it. That's why the ritual doesn't need blood, or chanting, or locks. It uses ambition, fear, hope, the most renewable resources in the world. Some nights, long after fame arrives, people wake up suddenly, heart racing, certain they hear a low hum, the same one that filled the walls that night. They reach for their phones. Then remember, no phones, no records. Some sit up and stare at the dark, terrified of what might appear if the room gets too quiet. They turn on the TV, music, anything, because silence feels like a question, and they already know the answer. If you're reading this and thinking, this is just a story, that's understandable. That thought is comforting. It lets you believe distance exists. But stories like this don't survive because they're believable. They survive because they're familiar. Because somewhere inside, something recognizes the pattern. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits. And one day, maybe years from now, maybe when you've almost given up, you'll receive something unexpected. An opportunity. An invitation. A door that wasn't there before. No address. No explanation. Just a time. And rules. And a sentence that feels heavier than it should. If you're here, you already agreed. And in that moment, the real ritual begins. Not in a house. Not in a mirror. But in the quiet space where you decide what matters more. What you want to become. Or what you're willing to lose. Because the most terrifying truth of all is this. Some nights never end. They only teach you how to stay silent about them. And those who learn that lesson well, they continue.